Russell Wilson is so back. The impossible has happened. Russell Wilson looks like old Russell Wilson. Sean Payton actually managed to fix him, and now he's playing at an elite level again. There were a lot of doubters. I wondered if it could ever happen again. I know a lot of people did, and here he is. Russell Wilson looks like his old self. Of course, the Broncos are still struggling a little bit, but Russell Wilson really does feel like someone that's kind of been overlooked a little bit this season. The Broncos are 4-5, and they do kind of have a chance to make the postseason. You know, early this season, through 6 games, they were 1-5, and they did not look good at all. It looked like Sean Payton was going to have the same issues as Nathaniel Hackett, and they've really turned it around in the last 4 weeks, and they've now won 3 straight. Denver only being 1 game under 500 at this point of the season honestly seems crazy. They ended up losing back-to-back close games at home to start the season. They lost to the Raiders 17-16 and then turned around and lost to the Commanders 35-33. Now, they played those games pretty close, but those are 2 pretty mid teams. The Raiders have already fired their head coach. Commanders probably will at some point. Then, after going 0-2, the Broncos went on the road for the first time, and oh my gosh, they flew down to Miami and got beat 70-20 and gave up 726 total yards. It was a complete massacre. It was ugly. Losing by 50 points to drop to 0-3 has just got to be demoralizing mentally. I don't know how you can come back from that. They really did look like the worst team in football through the first 3 weeks of the season. They won a bat off against the Bears in week 4, 31-28. You know, that at least put the Broncos in the win column finally, and then they lost to the Jets next week, 31-21, and that was a very highly sought after game. After all the drama in the offseason with Nathaniel Hackett getting fired, Sean Payton replacing him calling it one of the worst head coaching jobs ever, it made sense. It was a huge big deal, and the Jets did end up winning on the back of Zach Wilson. So I'm sure it hurt to lose that game. Denver at that point 1-4, and it wasn't looking good, and they had a really tough schedule coming up. In a 4-game stretch right after that, they had 2 against the Chiefs, the Bills, and the Packers were also in there as well, who Denver barely actually beat 19-17. The first matchup against Kansas City was kind of a weird game. Kansas City did still win 19-8, but Patrick Mahomes looked pretty rough. They were able to play well against them, and it felt like maybe if just that Broncos offense could have gotten going, even just a little bit, they would have won that game. And then 2 weeks later, Denver got their revenge and won 24-9. They just caused havoc on the defensive side of the ball. The entire game, they forced 5 turnovers. It was a huge win. It was able to put them on the right path. And honestly, it felt like, you know, maybe this was a fluke, but clearly it wasn't. On Monday Night Football against the Bills, the Broncos turned them over 4 times and ultimately won 24-22. Now, I will be honest, they may have gotten very lucky here. Thank you to the Bills' incompetence. Will Lutz missed what would have been a game-winning field goal after a bit of a crazy scramble drill, but the Bills had 12 players on the field. Lutz got another shot, and he buried it. It was actually one of the funniest ways I've seen a team lose a game. The Bills are 5-5. They're quite the mess right there, and they even just fired their offensive coordinator, Ken Dorsey. You know what? That's what happens, man. He just called way too many interception and fumble plays this year. That's what it had to be, because, you know, those turnovers, I don't know how you fire Ken Dorsey after that. Seems like a bit of a scapegoat, if you ask me. That too many men on the field penalty for a game-winning field goal just really seems like something that would have happened to the Broncos last year with Nathaniel Hackett as the head coach. I mean, he was just a pure disaster, but Denver has actually started to turn things around. The Broncos made that big splash in 2022 by trading for Russell Wilson. They had hired Hackett, who had had a ton of success with Aaron Rodgers, the back-to-back MVPs, great offense. There was all this optimism and hope for the Broncos, for Russell Wilson, for Nathaniel Hackett. Hackett, and it went terribly. Nathaniel Hackett started 4-11 and got fired. He only lasted 15 games. Jerry Rossberg took over as the interim, and then the Broncos had to go right back to the drawing board, and they made a splash, trading for Sean Payton in a trade that did include a first they had to give up to New Orleans. It was very, very needed because the belief was that Sean Payton could fix Russell Wilson. This quarterback who you traded a lot for, you have on this big contract, you need to somehow salvage him. Sean Payton thought he could, and he has. It was by far the worst year of Russell Wilson's career back in 2022. He only threw 16 touchdowns. He had at least 20 in every single season before that, plus he had 11 interceptions, which was tied for the second most in a season for himself. He didn't even look like himself. Russell Wilson was very, very hard to watch last season. I thought the Broncos were going to come in and have a really good year. I thought they were a playoff team, could at least try to make some kind of run against some of the big dogs, and it was just a complete disaster. And there are some reasons for that, obviously. I think the offensive scheme was one of the biggest issues. It was a very, very predictable offense. You often knew what was coming. Nathaniel Hackett really just was a mess, and I think we've been able to see a lot of that in New York this year as well. That offense has obviously had a ton of issues, not quite sure what they're doing at times. Of course, Zach Wilson being the quarterback hasn't exactly helped that, but I do have to wonder how much of a role Aaron Rodgers played in a lot of that success. Was it all Rodgers? Was it Rodgers making all the decisions? It just seems like Nathaniel Hackett is a train wreck wherever he goes at this point, and maybe he just got pulled along by Aaron Rodgers there for a little bit. On top of that, Russell Wilson did have to deal with some injuries last season, and I think that actually played a much bigger role than we ever discussed. He even had a knee surgery in the offseason, so you just have to wonder how much he was playing through last year, because not only was the offense bad, but he also didn't look like his old self. He's still trying to figure out this new system and a new team. He just needed a year. It was weird. Stuff happens. He did what he had to do. It was just a mess, but Sean Payton has turned it around. He's done the impossible, and Russell Wilson's all the way back. He's back looking like his old self. Through 9 games this season, he has 1,800 yards, 18 touchdowns, which is already 2 more than he had last season in 15 games, and he only has 4 interceptions. He has a 103.9 passer rating compared to his 84.4 passer rating a year ago. There were a lot of issues last season. I think Nathaniel Hackett was a big one, but there were some other exterior things happening. And now Sean Payton's there. He is the play caller in Denver, and they're back. I personally do like Russell Wilson a lot. He's a guy that I've been following for most of my life. He grew up in Richmond, Virginia, just like I did. So he's a guy that I've always paid attention to. He's a guy that I've very commonly rooted for when he was in Seattle and now in Denver. I know he gets some flack for a lot of stuff, but I do think he's a good dude, and he's somebody that I do want to see succeed. I'm just happy to see him come back to form, and the Broncos are exciting again. Brandon Perna can rejoice. They may legitimately make the postseason. It's very possible at this point. If they were in the NFC, I would probably take them to make the playoffs. AFC is a bit of a gauntlet, but we're just gonna have to wait and see. But the fact that we're talking about Denver maybe playing in the playoffs is a huge win in its own. Things are much better in Denver. That's just the reality. There's still a long way to go, obviously, but at least for now, it isn't the worst trade in NFL history. Of course, the Deshaun Watson trade has completely stolen that title at this point. Will he rebound next year? Probably not. I wouldn't bet on it. Even if Russell Wilson just ends up playing mid, things are kind of weak, it doesn't matter. That Deshaun Watson trade is going to take the cake for a long, long time. Hey, thanks for watching the video. We appreciate all the support recently. If you don't already, make sure you subscribe to the channel down below. Check us out on social media at JDProdNFL. Check out our own socials as well. I'm at DIIDLAKE, Twitter, Instagram, wherever you can find us. What do you think about the Russell Wilson turnaround? Have you really been paying attention to the Russell Wilson turnaround? Because I feel like it is something that hasn't been discussed too much. Obviously, since he just played in prime time, we finally got to kind of start seeing some of that dialogue churning. Before that, it was kind of just this idea that Wilson was really struggling, which has just not been the case. He's back. Sean Payton's doing his thing just like he was in New Orleans. I think it's awesome to see. What do you think? Appreciate it. We'll see you guys in the next video.